This is it. All right.
Sorry.
Mission control.
Now here's just a couple together. We have two empty seats right here on the very front row. If you would walk around.
Yep, around the back door.
Alright, only a few more seats left. If you run out of seats, just please stand behind the
Thanks, mate. Really appreciate that.
If there's no more seats available, just stand right next to you.
See, now if you give me trouble, I can just reach over and whack you.
That's it.
Because I've been keeping my eye on you guys.
Wow, that's history right there. That is history right there. Damn.
All right, good morning, everyone. I am your tram host, Tom, but I'm going to be talking to you today about mission control. If everybody's doing well, give me a thumbs up. All right, you just passed your first astronaut training test. Good job. We want to welcome you to Johnson Space Center, but particularly to Apollo Mission Control. What you are looking at is one of the most historic rooms in all of the world, because it was out of this room that they controlled all of the lunar landings when man walked on the moon. Now, this is so important because they could not have flown a foot off the ground without the help and direct control that happened from this room. There were a total of 19 consoles and 21 controllers or directors that sat in here, and each one had their own very special and critical job to do. Now, if you look out there, you're going to count and say, well, there aren't 17 consoles there. And that's correct. The front of the room's pretty empty, and there's a really good reason for that. We're less than a year and a half away from celebrating the 50th anniversary of the first landing on the moon. Please turn your flashes off.
I'm sorry.
Now, this is special because they could not have done it. This room was as much a part of the mission as the 3 astronauts that were on board the spacecraft. So what they want to do is they're reconditioning the consoles. These consoles that you see here are original to the Apollo missions. And while they look like they're in good condition, they are externally, they don't work. So they're taking groups of them back, and when they come back and reinstall them, they're going to light up. The screens are going to show data just like they would in the missions, and the push buttons and indicator lights will also light up. So it's really going to bring this room to life. Now, this room you're sitting in is also historic. This is the VIP viewing area that opened at the same time that this mission control room did. And it was in here that NASA administrators could bring in heads of industry, leaders of government, and perhaps the most important people to ever be in here were the families of astronauts that were flying a mission. Because in the late 1960s and early 70s, communications just wasn't good enough to where they could really keep close track of what was going on with their loved ones. So they could come in here anytime they wanted and for as long as they wanted. It also served another benefit to them because during the Apollo days, whenever there was a crew flying a mission, they were instant celebrities. And the press and photographers would try to find and follow the families around. So they could come in here and be away from that because the press was never allowed in this room. Now, the mission control room was active from 1965, beginning with Gemini 4, and it flew a total of 9 Gemini missions. Then it flew 10 manned Apollo missions, including all the lunar landings, and then finally 21 space shuttle missions when it was finally retired in 1992. And by then the room had gained National Historic Landmark status, so they tore out all of those upgraded consoles, and that's why we see these Apollo consoles in here now. Now, back here in this room, again, I'd mentioned that we had presidents in here, and every president that served from 1965 through 92 was in here at one time or another. So that was Lyndon Johnson through George H.W. Bush. But we also had some pretty important foreign heads of state, including Queen Elizabeth, who sat in this third chair from the end on the front row that's broken. Okay, she didn't break it, okay? This just broke a few months ago. But they're also going to really clean this room up. These squeaky seats and the old seat covers, the carpets, and even the wallpaper is original to the 1960s. But it's really in pretty darn good shape, so they're just going to kind of tune and clean things up in here. So everything's going to be pretty special. Let's talk a little bit more about what we have in front of us. Now, again, I'd said there are 19 consoles with 21 controllers or directors, and again, each one had their own special mission to perform. Now, there were thousands of pieces of information coming in, not only from the spacecraft, but also from tracking and radar stations around the world, and it was far more than they could handle here. So each one had a separate support room located elsewhere in the building where they had teams of engineers and scientists that helped them by weeding down all of that stuff and providing them just what they really had to have to make these critical decisions. They were also there if there was any kind of problem or emergency, they could instantly be available to help solve those. And a good example of that is Apollo 13. Now, many of you, I'm sure, have seen the movie, and hopefully most of you know enough about it to know that that was a disaster. There was an explosion of an oxygen tank that made the command module lose almost all of its oxygen. It lost its electrical power and even most of its water. And the only way that the three astronauts could get home was by using the lunar lander as a lifeboat. That was only designed for 2 people to use for 2 days. But they had that took 4 days to bring 3 astronauts home. They should have died. But it was the incredible work done in here by hundreds of support staff and thousands of design engineers that within an hour came together as a complete team to solve those problems one after the other. Any one incorrect decision would have killed the astronauts. But that's how critical this team was and how good they were. Now, with all that, one thing that surprises people is that the average age in here was 26 years old. These people were the very brightest out of college. They had worked for NASA or one of the primary contractors for 2 or 3 years, and they were so special and so good at what they did, they were invited to work here. You could not apply for a job in mission control. Now, they go through a couple of years of training, and then the last 6 months of it, they would fly simulations in this room if it wasn't active, flying a mission, or another room that's exactly equipped like it. So they'd learn not only how to work mission control, they learned much more about the spacecraft, and then most importantly, they flew simulations with hundreds of different kinds of problems. Every day they were flying a simulation was a bad day, because the most important thing that they could do is to make sure that they could come up with solutions instantly and correct solutions every time whenever there was a problem. Now, if you look at these consoles, a couple of things you'll see appear to be missing is there's no keyboard and there's not a mouse at any one of them. There's a couple of reasons. First of all, mice hadn't even been thought of, much less invented. But secondly, there are no keyboards because these aren't computers. These are what we call dumb terminals, which means that they brought in all the data and information from somewhere else, and then they were displayed on here, and then, of course, the controllers could use that data. But that doesn't mean they didn't have computers. In fact, the first floor contained one of the most advanced computer centers found anywhere in the world, called the Real-Time Computer Complex. Now, how many have heard of the term mainframe computer?
Yeah.
Okay, pretty good number of you. These were the workhorses from the early 1950s up through the early 1980s. You could not do any serious work without using a mainframe because computers, small computers, weren't even really invented until the late 1970s, and none of them were powerful enough to do the job until the 1980s when they could start networking them together. Now, the 5 computers that were on the first floor were IBM 360, Series 75. Each one of them was almost the size of this room, and each one required 5 to 10 technicians to keep running properly. Now, these were the finest computers of that time, and each one had an incredible 5 megabytes of memory capacity. So if you've taken 2 or 3 photos today on your iPhone, you just filled up the memory on one of those computers. But what's truly astounding is out of those 5 computers, it only took 2 of them to fly a complete lunar mission. That's handling instantly thousands of pieces of information coming in, instantly converting it to usable data, sending it to all the places it needed to go. They even ran those big screens on the back. They kept track of the location of the spacecraft down almost to the foot continuously, and could even predict its course very precisely, as many as 40 hours ahead of time. Pretty amazing work for an old computer, right? But that's how good it was, and the programming was truly amazing on it. There are a lot of things developed by the NASA and IBM engineers to make this happen that could not, that we use today even. Our cell phones and our laptops and our iPads would not work without some of the things that they developed here. Now lastly, this little speaker that's on top of the console closest to me, some of the most important words ever spoken came through that speaker. When Armstrong and Aldrin landed on the moon for the very first time and shut the descent engine down, they said, "Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." The very first words ever spoken from the moon. As Apollo 17 was about to leave, just before they ignited their ascent engine, they said, "We're on our way, Houston." So the first word and the last word spoken from the moon was Houston. Now they weren't talking to us that live in Houston, they were talking to this room, because this room was an inseparable part of their mission. Now with that, I hate to say this, but we do need to go back down to the shuttle. So as you stand up, first of all, remember to go back to the same row you were on before. Please remember to be quiet as you go down the stairs, and check and make sure you have your keys and cell phones, because these seats just love to eat that stuff. So anyway, we'll go ahead and go back downstairs.